So actually getting a pretty good turnout. I really appreciate everybody coming. I know Dennis does too. Like I say, Dennis has gone to a lot of work putting this together, and I know it's going to be a good experience for us all. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis with no further ado, and let's give him a hand for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you for being here this morning. I have a couple quick questions. Is Saturday morning a good time, or is a weeknight better? Those that prefer Saturday morning, raise your hand. Those that prefer a weeknight, raise your hand, please. So this works. This was an experiment. In fact, the reason I chose Saturday morning is because Stand Up for Idaho has stuff going all the time. And I thought, you know, when can we squeeze in the time for this? So I really appreciate you being here and showing your interest in our liberty. We're all in this together, is what we are. So, let's see. I'm planning on doing another class of follow-up. Those of you that came, it's been a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I did another class that was an introduction to the Constitution. And it's on the Stand Up for Idaho YouTube channel, if you're interested in viewing that. It's about a 2-hour video.
Dennis?
Yes?
We will also put this up on the YouTube channel, so if you know anybody else that wants to see it, they can watch it there.
Thank you. And I was going to recommend, it's probably easier for me to stand here, so if you need to find a different seat so you can see the screen, because everything here that I'm going to be talking about is on the screen, and I apologize, next time I'm going to get a long HDMI cable so that I don't have to stand here in the middle. But this is how I'm going to have to advance my, so there's seats up here in front, there's seats over here, there's a couple seats here in front, there's 3, and we can squeeze in together. So this is where I'm going to probably be standing. We can move chairs to the outside if that is helpful as well, okay? So you'll want to be able to view the screen. Okay. A question was asked of me the other day. A fellow asked me, what's your bio? Well, the obvious question is, what's your credibility in doing this? And that's a good question. It's a legitimate question. And what my qualifications are is, first of all, I know how to read. Right? And all of us have the Constitution, and all of us have the ability to read. Second qualification is I have a pair of reading glasses. They're only $5, so that I can read, all right? But we have to crack the thing open and read it. In fact, I got a text message from Art Macumber. Now, just to give credit where credit is due, this little Constitution was Art Macumber's idea. He's the one that's running for Attorney General from up in northern Idaho. He is an attorney, and he's a constitutional attorney, and I have a lot of respect for the man. But he came and spoke here at Stand Up for Idaho, and he had these to hand out. And I thought, what a great idea for Idaho citizens. You know, we have them for the U.S. Constitution and for our American citizenship. Why don't we do the same thing? Well, he came up with that idea. So Art Macumber is who's doing that. He's who promoted that. And I should say as well, on printing these, we had to reformat them. In fact, Art had it, and he had used a printer in northern Idaho that was costing more money. We had to reformat it a bit, and I should say that it wasn't just me that paid for this. My brothers, this is my brother Cliff over here, my 2 brothers and I went in together and paid to print 1,000 of these so that we could promote the idea. And we're going to try to promote it across Idaho, and not just here in Bonneville County. So if you don't have a copy of the Idaho Constitution, those that walked in, would you like a pocket Idaho Constitution? And You're welcome to take one, by the way, before you leave today. Now, along that same line, and I appreciate you mentioning that it's the Secretary of State that has these. I got this years ago, and it's all marked up, and I love it. But if you go on the Secretary of State's website, you can also download the PDF. And so I downloaded the PDF, put it in a binder so I can really study it. And I've got all kinds of markings in here, but it includes the Declaration of Independence and the Idaho Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. So, I just wanted to share those with you briefly. Okay, so what I have to say here today, you shouldn't take my word for. Quite frankly, when you hear the news and you hear the Compost Register, where did I hear that? When you hear the Compost Register say something about legislation that's going on in Idaho, you should go to the original document. If they're talking about some statute in Idaho law, or they're talking about some federal law, or if they're talking about Governor Little's mandate or President Biden's mandate, go find the law and read it, because we're going to talk about that here just a little bit today. So to begin with, I've broken down this discussion, what I've called the Idaho Bill of Rights. I used the word of Bill of Rights so you'd know what I was talking about. But in the Idaho Constitution, it's called the Declaration of Rights. If you look at Article 1 of the Idaho Constitution, you'll see that it's entitled the Idaho Declaration of Rights and its relationship to the U.S. Constitution. So the United States is a very important topic. Those of you that are coming in late, there are Idaho Constitutions up here, pocket size. You're welcome to come up and just get one, okay? Make yourselves at home. So the United States and our status as individual citizens in relationship to the United States is an important thing to understand. That's the first thing I'm going to talk about today, is the United States. Then I'm going to talk about the evolution of the Federal Bill of Rights, how it was developed, and its impact on the Idaho Declaration of Rights. Third, we're going to talk about picking the right law. Are we going to be using federal law, or are we going to be using state law to protect our rights? It matters. And then DIY, do it yourself. Be your own expert. When you hear the Compost Register say something about Janice McGeehan or Ammon Bundy or one of these, Steve Bradshaw from Northern Idaho, and they make these critical claims about these different people that are running for public office, go do your own research. Pick a reliable expert and read the documents. Just a quick note on that. Steve Bradshaw came here and spoke. He's running for governor. And in his speech, he got up and was talking about the ARPA money. And is that American, what is it, AR Rebound or something like that? Anyways, Act, ARPA, which is the money that came from the Treasury Department from Biden, the Biden administration. Anyway, he was talking about the money that was received in Bonner County. He's a county commissioner there. And he said they received this check, but they didn't know what the terms of receipt of that money was. And they didn't receive it. I know it was at least 2 months. It may have been longer than that, but some period of time. So they're going to deposit that check and start spending it before they know what federal terms are that regulate the use of that money. So anyway, I like Steve. Okay, the question then is, have you surrendered some of your rights in exchange for privileges? And that has to do with U.S. citizenship versus Idaho citizenship. And then lastly, I'm going to give you some homework that you can test the principles. So the United States, our status as Idaho citizens and as citizens or nationals of the United States of America, but not territorial or statutory citizens. So when we look at the statutes, the United States Code, are we talking about American citizens, or are we talking about what are called territorial citizens or statutory citizens? Because they're not the same. They don't enjoy the same rights. This is a handsome guy, but this is a U.S. passport, and if you see there at the top right, it says, I am a citizen or non-citizen national of the United States. How many in here have a passport? Raise your hand. Did you know that you can get a passport as a non-citizen national? Did you know that such a thing existed? Probably not. But a non-citizen national can get a U.S. passport, okay? And then on the passport itself, it doesn't talk about citizenship. It talks about nationality. Isn't that interesting? What's the difference between citizenship and nationality? Nationality is where you're born, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily have citizenship, that you necessarily have the political right to vote. Okay, that's a specific political right. So, nationality. So, I propose that there are two different groups in America. You have what are called the Idaho citizens on the left, and you have the U.S. citizens on the right. U.S. citizens want the government to take care of them. Okay? All or most of us, I would assume in this room, believe in being self-reliant, independent, making decisions for our own lives. You probably decide what supplements to take in the morning or at night, right? All of those kinds of things. And we don't need government to tell us how to do it. So these are U.S. citizens, and I'll develop that in a few moments, which deals with privileges and immunities. And these are Idaho citizens that are interested in rights. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are more seats up there if I'm in your way. Please find a different seat if it's easier for you to see the screen. So, if you're asked the question by a judge or a policeman or an agency worker, somebody that works for the government, are you a United States citizen? Your answer is, well, I object to your question. It's ambiguous. And the reason it's ambiguous, the term United States, is because the term United States has multiple meanings. This is taken from a Supreme Court case in 1945, Hooven versus Evatt. It's a tax case, and it has to do with importing products in from the Philippines into Ohio. So it was coming from outside of the United States border, brought into one of the Union states, and they were questioning: is this a international or international import, or is this a domestic import? And the reason is the federal government only has power to tax international imports, international commerce, right? That's one of its delegated and limited powers. But if they're shipping it from state to state, they can't impose that tax, can they? It doesn't apply. They don't have the power to do that. So the question came before the court. Now, at the time, the Philippines were a dependent territory, just like Puerto Rico is today, a dependent territory. They're not anymore, but at that time they were. So the question was, are they domestic or is this international trade? And the court said the term United States may be used in any one of several senses. It may be merely, one, the name of a sovereign in the family of nations, or a sovereign nation in the family of nations. It may designate, two, the territory over which the sovereignty of the United States extends, or it may be, three, the collective name of the states which are united by and under the Constitution. And that's summarized underneath, and you can see what's called, number 2 is called Congressional Exclusive Jurisdiction. Does Congress have exclusive jurisdiction in Idaho? That's a question. No. Why? Because Idaho is it's a sovereign nation or state. The word state means the same thing as nation. They mean the same thing. And when I use the word state in this discussion today, state can mean the Idaho government. State can mean the municipal corporation of Idaho Falls. It can mean the federal government. The word state is kind of a catch-all term that applies to any organized community under a government. So Idaho Falls, the state of Idaho, and the federal government as well, okay? All three are considered states. But exclusive jurisdiction, does Congress exercise exclusive jurisdiction in any of the several states? And the answer is no. It's a limited jurisdiction applying to interstate commerce for specific purposes and international commerce. And it applies, and let's go on and I'll show you the rest of that, exclusive jurisdiction. So in another case, in 1901, Downs versus Bidwell, this was another tax case, and it happened to deal with Puerto Rico. It was the same question. They were shipping in products, so this was earlier than the one we just mentioned, but they were shipping in products, and the question was this international commerce, or is it interstate commerce, or is it domestic commerce? And the court said the Constitution is applicable to the territories only when and so far as Congress shall so direct. What do you think of that? Isn't that interesting?
It's invalid.
Huh?
It's invalid.
Well,
Congress does not have the authority to direct Idaho and
okay.
violate Idaho's sovereignty.
Good point. I appreciate that. What is a territory? Good point. What is a territory? So let's talk about this concept just for a second. Whenever you look, yes, go ahead.
There is an overlap, though, because, for instance, under the Clean Air Act, just as an example, Idaho is not authorized to have its own program. So we do and are regulated by the feds in that case. So I guess I'm just saying it's kind of a hodgepodge in commerce, maybe, but they can still get their fingers in it.
That's a good point, and we'll talk about that more. Now, we're actually getting into a little bit different area than what I'd hoped to go into, but it's good to talk about this. These are good questions. Go ahead.
So the Clean Air Act comes from the EPA, which I believe is an unconstitutional branch of the federal government, because the Constitution does not allow it.
I agree.
Period. And my wife's an environmental engineer,
okay.
So does she.
Good point. Both really good points. We'll come back to that. Ben.
Well, I was going to say, I think just there's a distinction that has to be made here between the sovereignty or not, right? The United States is the type of sovereign that we have. So the United States can dictate how we live our lives to some extent. The state has sovereignty over us as well. What's unique about a territory is a territory does not have a separate sovereign from the United States. So when we talk about territories, we're not talking about the colloquial sense of a territory, as in this room is a territory that we're in. Like that's not what it means at all. A territory refers to a pact of land that the United States federal government owns and has exclusive jurisdiction over. There's no separate entity that has jurisdiction over it.
Okay, all of those are really spot on points to make. Here's the first point I want to make about that. When you read a statute, or when you read a word in the Constitution or in a statute, do you know the meaning of that word? I'm betting you don't. Even the word person. Now, Ben and I are a little bit conflicted on this, and that's fine. We all can have our own opinion. I have my opinion, and he has his opinion. I'm not saying we're at odds on this, but I am personally convinced that the use of the words person, quote person, in most statutes are not referring to flesh and blood people. if you read the Constitution, it uses the word people, and it uses his and hers as pronoun, not the whatever we're doing today. I mean, everything's lost its meaning. But if you read the Constitution, and where it uses the word his or her, actually it uses his because it's gender neutral his. It says, we believe that all men are created equal. Well, that includes women, right? Mankind, okay? But the word person, as used in most statutes, is not referencing men and women. It's referencing what are called artificial persons. An artificial person is a corporation, an LLC, a trust, an association. So, for example, when I did some personal, private, political brochures last campaign, I didn't put my name on it. And, well, okay. And people were attacking that brochure saying this had needed to have a name on it, who paid for it. Well, the fact of the matter, if you go to the Idaho statute that governs the publishing of political literature, what it says is it says persons, corporations, LLCs, groups, political action groups, and so on and so forth. These people have to file with the Secretary of State what they're spending, and they have to put on their literature who published that brochure. Well, guess what? I'm not governed by that statute, and that person doesn't apply to me, because under the Bill of Rights, I have the right of what's called freedom of speech, and it isn't qualified. That freedom of speech, well, it is qualified in that if I create a danger to other people, only in that sense is it qualified. Beyond that, it's not qualified. Or if I cause harm to somebody. So when you read in fact, if you read the Idaho Constitution, you see a lot of times, for instance, Article 1, Section 1, it uses the word people, and then it uses the word person occasionally in there, and then it goes all the way to the taxing power of the Idaho government, and it says natural persons are subject to this tax also. Why did they qualify it in one section of the Constitution, but they didn't qualify it everywhere else? Do you follow what I'm saying? If they use a defined definition, natural person also means man or woman. That includes people. But natural person doesn't include artificial persons. It doesn't include corporations. It isn't qualified. So, territories. What is it talking about in territories here? If you go to Downs versus Bidwell, the territories is not talking about the states. It is not talking about the Union states. This is talking specifically about the territories and possessions of the United States. So that was a long explanation of why when you read something in a statute or the Constitution or in a Supreme Court case, you need to understand the term. So that brings up another quick topic.
But just real quick, but Idaho then was a territory until 1890, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So
yes. And it was under the exclusive jurisdiction of Congress until it became a state. Okay? My recommendation, if you're interested in really studying this, now you can go online and you can find some reasonably good law dictionaries. But Black's Law is the Bible of the legal system, basically. Black's Law. This is a 6th edition. 7th edition is good. I like the 6th edition because it does what is called annotate the definitions. So, for example, if it's talking about a particular word in here, it'll also give you some Supreme Court cases that give authority to their definition. Does that make sense? It gives you references. Yes?
We have a Webster's 1828 dictionary at home.
Really?
Well, it's a reprint.
Yeah, yeah.
We often look up words, what they mean, because they mean things differently back in 1828 than they do now. I think another important point is to go to the Federalist Papers and look what the Founding Fathers said about words at that particular time as well.
I really agree. And I appreciate you pointing that out. Webster's 1829, was it?
1828.
28 dictionary. Very good point. What I used for that was recommended what's called Bovier's Law Dictionary, and it was printed, as actually printed in 1918, but it was done as legal research to look at the definitions that were being used at the time the Constitution was written. And so, in fact, in Bovier's Law Dictionary, you know it says in the Idaho article of, or Declaration of Rights, it uses the word inalienable rights. But in the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, it says unalienable rights. If you go to those dictionaries, guess what? The word inalienable isn't there in 1800. The only you will find unalienable but not inalienable. That's just kind of a nerdy thing that I found. But I think it's important to understand, because sometimes you hear people criticize the writers of the Constitution saying they used the wrong word. It isn't true. They used the right word because that was the term in vogue at that time. Okay? So, now, this is a representation, a graphic representation of the United States in its three different forms. National, as a member of the family of nations, the United States government, number 2, exclusive jurisdiction, and the Union States comprising the United States of America, number 3. Okay? So there you have America in the family of nations, as viewed by Brazil and Canada and England, so forth. And guess what? The U.S. government is a corporation, literally. It is a trustee set in place to conduct the business of the United States of America's international trade. It has the war powers. We'll get into that a little further. But it's our agent. We call it a servant, call it an agent. It's the trustee. This is the business of government. It regulates international, interstate commerce, taxes the commerce that it regulates. It provides national defense. It regulates coinage, copyrights, patents, bankruptcies. You go down the list. But guess what? It owns nothing. Do you remember John D. Rockefeller? You ever heard the quote of John D. Rockefeller? Just before he died, they said he was going to die a pauper. And he said, "I don't care what I own, I only care what I control." Some of you have heard that comment or something. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Okay? Well, Congress controls the territories, but it doesn't own it. It's the property of whom? The United States of America. That's who owns it. If it's the trust, if the government is the trustee, what's the trust? The trust is our Constitution. It's the document that formalized the terms of the trust. That's the trust. Then Idaho, the people of Idaho, and all of the Union states combined is what's known as the United States of America. Okay, so there's 3 different United States. Then we have the territories and possessions, which are owned by the United States of America, but managed by and controlled by the Congress of the United States. There's no sovereignty in the territory. There is no sovereignty. And as I mentioned earlier from that case, the Constitution is only applied in the territories, and that was true of Idaho prior to 1890. The Constitution is only applied here so far as Congress chooses to apply it. Now, in most cases, Congress has actually extended the protections of the Constitution to the territories to some degree. But do you know that in Puerto Rico, which is on that picture right there, they don't pay income taxes. I was curious about that. I just went on the Puerto Rico some website, and that was one of the things that they were tooting as a reason for you to move there. There's no income tax there. Well, why are you paying an income tax? And they are called U.S. citizens, but they are not the same U.S. citizen as a citizen of the constitutional United States of America. They do not enjoy the Bill of Rights, only so far as Congress chooses to extend it. So, are you a U.S. citizen? Now, I asked that question earlier, and the answer to that would be, well, it depends. Which one are you talking about? Which one? U.S. versus Cruikshank, 1875. This was 7 years after the passage of the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War ended. We have in our political system one, government of the United States, and two, a government of each of the several states. Each one of these governments is distinct, and I added and foreign, but if you read the cases, that's what it says. They are foreign to each other, and they are foreign to the federal government. And each government has citizens of its own who owe it allegiance and have rights within its jurisdiction, which it must protect. Now we're going to get towards the 14th Amendment. You hear that the 14th Amendment is what extends the protections of the Constitution to us as state citizens. That's what you hear, if you've heard that. I've heard that, certainly. The 14th Amendment, and we're going to break it down a little bit here, has different provisions in it. The Privileges and Immunities Clause, and I underline the word clause because it's just one section, of the 14th Amendment protects very few rights because it does not incorporate any of the Bill of Rights. Nor protect all rights of individual citizens. Instead, this provision, the clause, protects only the rights which are peculiar to being a citizen of the federal government. It does not protect those rights which relate to state citizenship. That's a 1993 case, and that also goes at length quoting from the slaughterhouse cases of 1872, which talked about state citizenship and the importance of state citizenship. So here I've broken it down. Any questions right now? Anybody have any questions? What I'm doing is I'm distinguishing between state citizenship and federal citizenship. State citizenship is protected under the Idaho Declaration of Rights, and we're moving towards that. Yes?
Where do the people fit under the Washington, D.C.?
They're territorial, aren't they?
Yeah, I was going to say, do they pay taxes? What do they get here?
Well, actually, they are under the exclusive jurisdiction of Congress. Congress exercises what is called local legislation in the District of Columbia, and in fact, the income tax that we're so familiar with originated based on District of Columbia taxation upon employees and agents of government. And it's my opinion that's the only place where it belongs. And that's another conversation. Okay?
So,
yes?
you're talking about the territories of the United States and Congress has exclusive control over. How do we come into ownership of those? Because
by purchase sometimes. Some of them were by purchase. Some of them were by treaty. Sometimes at the close of a war. It's my understanding the Philippines was acquired under treaty following the Spanish-American War, if I understand that correctly. Somebody here probably knows.
I was just curious because I hear a lot of people are all upset about the Chinese building islands. And in my view, there's no problem with building the island if you want, versus us just sending the military to Guam and saying, you guys are Americans now, and we just steal islands, at least the Chinese are building the islands.
Yeah. Those are moral questions, and I think they're important questions. I would guess that under international law, that a country that builds its own island probably has claim on that island, would be my guess. I don't know a lot about that, but that would be my guess, unless they're within some other nation's territorial waters. Beyond that, I would guess that they probably have the right to do that. So, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So we talked about that exclusive jurisdiction, right? All I'm doing is raising the question for our purposes here, but what is the jurisdiction? But anyway, persons born or naturalized are citizens of the United States and citizens of the state wherein they reside. This is the 14th Amendment. What was the purpose of the 14th Amendment? To give the slaves legal protection against the state governments. Constitutions limit government. They don't limit private activities, per se, okay? Per se. The purpose of the Idaho Constitution was to limit the state of Idaho, our government. The purpose of the federal Constitution was to what? Limit the federal government, place limits upon it. So, these are called citizens of the United States. This is the first time in American law that the term citizen of the United States appears. Look at your federal Constitution. In Article 4, I believe it's 3.2 or something like that, it talks about what are called citizens of the several states. That's the only citizens that are described in the federal Constitution. Now later on you see U.S. citizenship, but it's following the 14th Amendment. It's following 1867 or 68. And if you download a PDF, in fact I encourage you to download that PDF from the Secretary of State's website, because then you can do Google searches for these kinds of things. And be a little nerdy about it and ask those kinds of questions. But U.S. citizenship doesn't appear anywhere in the Constitution prior to the 14th Amendment. So, no state, meaning Idaho, shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. So, we created citizens of the United States so we could put the now freed slave community in a legal status that the federal government can step in and protect them from the states. That's what happened. Because the states were refusing to give them citizenship, they were refusing to recognize them as common citizens in their states. So they had to create a new thing, and we'll get to a case on that in a moment. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So, in the middle paragraph, we're talking about the Privileges and Immunities Clause, and in the last paragraph, we're talking about the Due Process and Equal Protection Clause. They're two different clauses. Who is protected in privileges and immunities? Only citizens of the United States. But all states are protected in property, life, and liberty. Yes?
It looks to me like Governor Little violated the 14th Amendment.
I agree.
You don't say. Individual businesses is non-essential.
Yep.
And therefore, I believe he should have been recalled. If our citizens knew the Constitution, and understood it and their rights, he would have been removed from office before now.
That's a great point. Would you open this up to the Idaho Constitution, the very Article 1, Section 1, please? It's the first page of the Constitution. What you said, I so agree with. The first paragraph of the Idaho Constitution, I think, is the most important paragraph for you and me to be familiar with in protecting our rights, both from the federal government and from the state government. Would you like to read that?
Article 1, Section 1.
Do you want to stand up and
Declaration
speak loud so everybody can hear you? And follow along if you...
of Rights. Am I at the right place? Article 1, Declaration of Rights.
Yeah.
Okay. Inalienable rights of man, so inalienable. All men are by nature free and equal and have certain inalienable rights, among which are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring and possessing and protecting property, pursuing happiness, and securing safety, and I might add, without the interference of the government.
That's right. So here's a question I have for you. What document from the federal government does that sound like to you? What he just read? Who said what? I couldn't hear you. The Declaration of Independence. When we read the Constitution of the United States, there is nothing in it that talks about that doctrine, that it is an unalienable right for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, the right to obtain, hold, and control private property. And any time, let me just propose to you, any time that government violates your personal rights in that way, I believe it is incumbent upon us to challenge it. There's different ways to challenge it. You simply refuse to put a mask on. You refuse to take a vaccine. Now, there's other issues here because when you're working for an employer, they're private, and some of them are receiving money from the federal government. But the question arises, in my opinion, are they in violation of your rights as a corporation to do so? Now, I think it's Article 11 of the Idaho Constitution that talks about corporations and that they're bound to abide by the laws of the Constitution of the state of Idaho. You can read for that and interpret that on your own, but I am of the opinion, from my studies, that when government violates any of your rights, you should challenge them. Because the problem is if there's no pushback, it's that first foot in the door thing, and the door just gets wider and wider and wider. And so I know I'm talking to the choir here. I don't know what your experiences are, but you can write letters. I just sent a FOIA request to the Supreme Court of the state of Idaho asking them what money they received from the federal government or that they sent ARPA funds, whether it came through the state of Idaho or whatever the source was. And I also asked them, I want the terms of that agreement. I want you to supply me with the terms of of what you agreed to in accepting those funds. I did it with the Bonneville County, and I got a great response, and I'll show that to you here in a minute. So, anyway, privileges and immunities only apply to citizens of the United States. But I don't want any privileges, and I don't need your immunities because I have rights. I don't want your privileges. I don't need your immunities because I have rights.
I don't need to give you a religious exemption. I don't have to do what you tell me.
So there may be dual citizenship involved here. Say that again, Nick. I apologize.
I don't need your religious exemption.
That's right.
You can't do this to me.
That's right.
I have a right. I don't need your
right.
religious exemption. Therefore, I won't fill out your religious exemption request, and I'll put my middle finger in the air and get fired for it.
That's what happens. So these immunities are called religious exemptions. That's what an immunity is. I am immune from your regulation because I'm begging. I am prostrating myself on the ground before you, asking for an exemption from this rule that applies to me unless you give me the exemption. That's what you're saying. Just forgive me for using the analogy, but it's like being a slave on the plantation. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm seeing through here where it's defining a citizen as a person born or naturalized.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this in the direction of abortion, so kind of follow along with me on this. But it also includes, under that umbrella, a person or a citizen as defined in the state. So if the state of Idaho defines a person outside of that scope of whether or not they're born or not. I mean, we have enough science and intelligence to zero in on individual DNA of a fetus as a person. If we declare that person a person, then that removes the authority for them to dictate on the level of Idaho, but it still offers that person a protection where they have to then protect that person under their guidelines.
I appreciate that. I've got a deal coming up here in just a minute that expands that very thought. What he's saying is, can the state of Idaho expand our protections against government? And the answer to that is yes, or to the involvement or all of government's activities. Yes, it can be expanded by the state, and we'll go into that in a minute. So, okay, so as a Idaho citizen, if I want to apply for the protections of the federal government through the 14th Amendment, I don't go through the Privileges and Immunities Clause, I go through the Due Process Clause and Equal Protection Clause, because guess who that applies to? Any person. Any person. Does that apply to a national? Does that apply to an illegal alien? Yes, but only for rights. Remember, privileges and immunities only apply to U.S. citizens. A privilege would be, for example, the right to Social Security. Does an illegal alien have the claim on Social Security? No, because it's a privilege. Does he have a claim to protect his body, his person, and his property? Yes, because that's a natural right. You see the difference? Okay?
Why doesn't it say natural person then?
Where was natural person at? What were?
Well, corporations still have a right to protect property.
That's correct. Corporations still have rights as well for certain things, not everything. Can a corporation refuse to let the government audit their books? No. The reason is because the corporation is a creature of the state. A corporation is acknowledged and created under state grant of authority. As a result, it can regulate and control the things that it creates. Okay? It didn't create me. It didn't create you. So that's the difference between. So there are cases where and for example, a corporate officer, if they come to a corporate officer and they're suing the corporation, can the corporate officer invoke the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? And the answer is no, because who they're prosecuting is the corporation, not the corporate officer. Now, if he's going to give information in his testimony that may tend to incriminate him, then he can invoke the Fifth Amendment. That's how that works. Okay. So, life, liberty, and property are rights. Any person, including illegal aliens, have the protection of our Constitution. And they should have in their person, their property, their life. And now, are they free to be in America without coming in legally? No, that is not a right. If they came in illegally, they've broken the law and they can be kicked out. But so far as their person, their property, and that, they are protected. Do they have the right to go to a hospital? No, that's a privilege. The hospital is licensed by the state. It's a corporate creature, and it's governed by law. If somebody comes in an emergency room, they have to admit them as a matter of legislation. Somebody had a comment or a question? Dave?
So, when it says nor shall any state, e.g. Idaho, that would include the state of the United States as well, that corporation?
That's correct.
So
that is correct.
It says we can't.
But that's not referring to the U.S. corporation. That's referring to the specific, independent, separate union states is what that's referring to.
So is there somewhere else that says that the United States can't deprive you of these rights? I assume in the...
Well, the Constitution, you have the Bill of Rights, which applies to the federal government.
Well, my reason I asked the question
Yeah.
is it says you can't deprive any person of life, liberty, or property.
Right.
Without due process.
Right.
But some years ago, President Obama sent a drone to kill a United States citizen with no trial. It's nothing, right? They executed Anwar al-Awlaki, who I'm not saying was a good guy, he was a U.S. citizen, and he was not tried, just killed with a drone. And the reason I say this is important is if he can do it to that U.S. citizen, they can do it to this U.S. citizen.
Well, there are some differences there. I don't know the answer to your question. I have to admit, because I haven't looked at international law like I am about domestic law. I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that what you're surmising is probably accurate, but I don't know. I don't know. But on U.S. territory, you have specific rights. Living in a state, as a state citizen, you have specific rights. Internationally, just a thought is, when you leave the country and you have a passport with you, there are certain duties that the government attaches to you as you leave, and certain duties that attaches to the government in regard to your safety. So he may have broken the law in doing that. I just don't know. But it certainly was without due process, and he may have argued, well, we don't need to give him due process because that only applies within U.S. territory. Now, I do know that there's some truth in that. There was a Japanese case of a freighter that was in Japan, and he was tried by a jury of, I think, 5 or 6 people, and he was found guilty. And he appealed the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that he was deprived of his constitutional right to I don't remember what the jury provision is, but under U.S. law, it was 12 for a capital crime, I think. And he claimed that he was denied due process under that, and the court said, no, due process under the Constitution didn't attach to him because he was not on United States soil, and that he did in fact, under territorial or admiralty law, he did in fact, they claimed, he said, that he got due process. So different rules apply outside of U.S. Borders. It's a good question, okay? So privileges and immunities apply to a subclass of Americans known as U.S. citizens. We got all people that are protected in their life and liberty, but only U.S. citizens are protected in privileges and immunities. So protections of a person's right to privacy is like the protection of his property and of his life, left largely to the law of the individual states. This is from a Supreme Court case 1967, fairly recent. This is an interesting case. This is called Green versus Alechua. This was a recent case in Florida over mask mandates. This was on appeal. This wasn't the trial court. On appeal, he lost a trial. He appealed it to a Florida appeals court, and this is what they said. Quote, "The citizens of Florida, through their state constitution, may provide themselves with more protection from governmental intrusion than that afforded by the United States Constitution." That's what you were talking about. That the Idaho Constitution, in my opinion, provides in some cases more protection than we get under the Bill of Rights, with the Federal Bill of Rights. Continuing the quote, "Florida citizens secured for themselves a broader state right of privacy known as the right to be let alone." Leave me alone. Okay? Quote, "Every natural person," so I told you earlier, person, natural person refers to people, he and she. They were specific here. Natural person has the right to be let alone and free from government intrusion into the person's private life except as otherwise provided herein. Now, that's a very interesting statement, and that's part of the Florida Constitution. I wished it was part of our Constitution, but there are what are called implied rights. And I believe this is an implied right, both under the Federal Bill of Rights and also under the Idaho Article 1, Section 1 statement of human rights there, of people's rights. He won the case, by the way, on appeal. The appeals court said the county, Alechua County, does not have the right to tell you that you have to wear masks in your business, nor can you compel your customers to wear a mask. This was June of last year. Yes.
So then, how does that apply? How is that applicable to the feds when they come and say you have to wear a mask at the airport in Florida? I know we're going to Idaho law, but so if this was decided,
good question. The airports are under FAA regulation. Who controls the FAA? Federal government.
So but why does federal statute or law supersede state statute or law?
Well,
what's the reason?
That's a really good question. It's an excellent question. The post office is run by whom?
The feds.
The feds. The FBI is run by the feds. And rightfully so. That's considered a property or territory of under the exclusive jurisdiction of Congress. It's just like if they set up an Air Force base in Utah, Roy, and the federal government regulates the operation of that Air Force base. And it is exclusive jurisdiction, even though it's within the boundaries of the state. And I believe that's what applies to the airports, I think. Okay? Again, I that's my speculation, yes.
So is there a distinction between a corporation or LLC denying a service to somebody because their existence is dependent upon the state or however they're formed? Or is there a distinction between an individual doing business as whether they can deny somebody?
That's a really good question, and that's a question I asked last year. I sued Natural Grocers because I had been told by a friend of mine that their children had been cornered in Natural Grocers and been demanded that they put masks on in the store. I had shopped at Natural Grocers. I've shopped there since they opened here. You know, I've been a good customer. And all during 2020, all during 2020, not once, they always had a sign on the door, and sometimes it got bigger, and sometimes they had more than one that said, "You must put on a mask." And I just ignored it. And I hope you all ignored it. And if you didn't, that's okay, I forgive you. But anyway, I ignored it, and I just went in, and I shopped there all the time when they posted these masks, and the poor employees I don't think they're wearing them now, but the poor employees, you go into Albertsons, you go into Home Depot, I mean, all the nationals, the locals aren't doing it anymore. Why? It's because the nationals are getting the ARPA money, and we're going to talk about that briefly. We'll get to that. But anyway, I'll keep this brief. I knew what they had done to these kids. It was a criminal. It was criminal what they did to these kids. So that was like on a Tuesday before Thanksgiving. She told me about it, and I prepared a document that said I refuse to comply, basically in so many words. I said I refuse to comply. And I believe that this is a discriminatory practice that you are enforcing, and that you're anyway. So I went in, and I was nervous. I got to admit, this was out of my comfort zone. Guys, get out of your comfort zone. Get out of your comfort zone. Pick up your Idaho Constitution and read it occasionally. Keep it in your car if you're waiting for your husband or your wife. Just get into it and read a little. Keep a pen around, make notes, okay? Get out of your comfort zone. So anyway, what happened was I went in the day after Thanksgiving, so that would have been a Friday morning, and they had all the signs up, and I turned on my iPhone and I recorded the whole thing. And I went in and they said, "Oh, you have to put on a mask today." I said, "What's the difference today? I was in here 2 weeks ago and I didn't need a mask." "Well, we're doing it now." I said, "Okay, well, she said, you can't come in. I says, you know, I don't need to get in an argument with you. I said, call your manager, make that person responsible. So she called the manager, and I walked in and I started shopping. And I was also looking for their business license, because their business license, guess what? Business license is a franchise from the state. It means that you have to comply with certain rules and regulations in order to have a license. And part of my challenge is you as a licensed business cannot discriminate against me because I am not wearing a mask. That was my premise, okay? Now I could be wrong. I'm not sure I'm wrong, but I could be wrong. I accept that. It's okay to be wrong occasionally and fail. It's okay to fail, right? It's okay to fail, make some mistakes. So anyway, I go in, and I didn't need much, and I really wasn't there to buy anything. I was there to challenge their policy. That's why I was in that store that day. I went there for that purpose. So I give me a bottle of kombucha. Anybody here drink kombucha? Nobody, I'll bet. Nobody likes kombucha. You like kombucha? All right. Anyway, so I go in and I get a bottle of kombucha, and the guy says, you need to leave. He says, or we're going to call the police. And I said, well, call the police. I said it to him. Well, call the police then if you believe that I'm in violation of the law. So they did. So I went up to the counter, and I put the bottle on the counter, and there's the clerk behind the counter saying, I can't take your money. I said, well, here's my money, and I laid it on the counter in front of him. I says, there's my money. I am tendering payment for an offer you made to me here. You made a public offer to sell kombucha. I've accepted your offer, and there's payment tendered in front of you. And by this time, the police were on their way. They weren't there yet. But
And you're still filming, right?
yeah, I'm filming the whole thing. And so now we've got the clerk, both the assistant manager and the acting manager, standing behind the counter on this deal. And I filmed it all, yeah. So they said, we can't take your money. So I said, well, okay, I've made my offer. So at that I thought, so I'm developing this in my head as I'm going along. I'm kind of, you know, shooting from the hip. So I walk out of the store, I get in my car, and I drive away, and I think, hold it. They can't claim that I stole it if I leave the money on the counter and walk out with it. Is that valid? I think it's valid. They can't claim I stole it. So I whip around, pull back into the parking lot, and I go back and I get my bottle of kombucha, and I come back up again. This time the cops are showing up. So I go through the whole thing, and I've got two cops here, and I've got another cop behind them, and the guys were just doing their job. Or at least they're doing what they think is their job. And that's the case with most government agents. They're only doing what they've been taught to do. They don't know the law. They do not know the law. They don't want them to know the law. So the cops are here in front of me. I go through the same scenario. I place the money on the counter. This time the cop steps in and picks up my money and hands it back to me. That's interference. He has now violated a private transaction between two individuals. He's invaded it, and he has imposed state agency in the transaction, right? Okay, so that's what I thought. Legally, that was my argument. So anyway, by the way, let's see. I did send letters following the exchange. And they wanted to trespass me. So finally we walk out to the front, and they say, I need your identification. And I said, what for? Well, because we're going to charge you with trespass. I said, so you're charging me with a crime? Yeah. Well, I said, I'm going to invoke the Fifth Amendment then. I'm not going to give you evidence of who I am. I'm not giving you my ID. It really stymied him. He didn't know what to do with me. I didn't give him my ID. I said, are we done here then, or are you detaining me? Those are the magic words. Are you detaining me? And he said, no, we're not detaining you. I said, thank you, and I walked away.
So they got your license number, right?
What?
They got your license on your car?
Well, those of you that know me know that I don't have license plates on my car.
Oh my word.
That's another topic, and it has to do with the topic of rights. But it's one that I happen to believe in, and I do practice it. I don't. I travel, I don't drive. Travel does not require a license. And that's been ruled on by the Supreme Court many times. What we've been taught is that you have to get a license. That make you nervous? You want to try that? Okay, don't do it unless you know what you're doing. That's another topic for another day. But if you're interested, I'd teach you about it. So anyway, so anyway, I filed suit, and let me tell you what I learned about litigation. I already knew some about litigation. I knew how to defend a case, but I'd never done one where I was prosecuting a case. So I learned a lot about litigation. And I learned that if you're going to sue the state or an agent of the state, you have to prove, first of all, that they are an agent of the state. Okay, I lost my case. I didn't appeal it. I just had too much on my plate. I couldn't appeal it. But I spent a lot of time studying for that. I learned a lot about litigation. I learned a lot about courtroom procedure. Okay? Now, could I have found an attorney to defend me on that? Nick, what do you say? How many attorneys did you find with the INL? The INL vaccine mandate was a legitimate natural rights defense to the vaccine mandate. We couldn't find an attorney in the state of Idaho to represent that case for hundreds of INL workers, could we? There were millions of dollars involved in this kind of litigation, and we couldn't find an attorney to defend it. Could we? Okay. So,
Brian Smith, I heard he's an attorney.
He doesn't want it.
Well, to be honest, litigating that kind of a case is extremely expensive and it requires a big staff. I got to admit it. It was not an easy case to litigate. Just to be fair on that. There were some attorneys around the country doing it. This is one of them. Green versus Alechua. This was a Florida attorney that defended this case on the mask mandate and won on appeal. So let's move along here just a little. So anyway, on the case, I learned so much, and I still think there's an argument to be made that when and somebody asked a question over here, when a corporation, a private corporation, steps into the position of imposing a state mandate on its customers, I believe that it's acting as a state agent. That's my opinion. And if you look at Article 11 of the Idaho Constitution, it talks about corporations and their duty under the Constitution. Okay? I don't know the argument. I'm not sure I know the real argument there, but I think there's an argument to be made. So,
But just sorry to belabor the point, but why is it a state mandate? Can't natural grocers just say? I mean, a lot of the big box stores,
You're right.
They did it. They said, so Costco said you have to wear a mask, but they didn't say we're enforcing state mandate. They said you have to wear a mask.
Well, that's a good question, but I have a letter exchanged between me and the General Counsel for Natural Grocers. I have 2 letters in which they say we are imposing the Idaho mandate.
Okay, good.
Okay, good question. So this is one of the things you do when you're in a conflict with somebody is you send them a letter and they respond. And you send them another letter and they respond again. And that qualifies the facts of the case. What are the facts of this case? Well, I was saying that they were invoking state mandates on their customers, and as such, they were acting as state agents. That's what my claim was. That was part of my argument. And did I really feel like the trial court was going to rule in my favor? Not really. Just like this Green versus Alechua didn't rule in his favor at the trial court. I think that's an impractical expectation when you're talking about rights. When you're talking about rights of an individual and they're having to and they're having to sort out whether the right of the individual is what is the rule of law here, or is the statute or the governor's mandate the rule of law here? And the courts are looking at that, and generally they're going to rule against the rights claim in favor of the statute or the mandate. That is generally what happened. It's what's happened in Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks got on the bus in 1955. The city ordinance says she couldn't be on that seat. If there was a white person there, she had to give up the seat. They appealed it to the circuit, or to the state appeals court. She lost again. They appealed it to the state Supreme Court. She lost again. They appealed it to the federal district court. She lost again. She appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was the only one that mattered. Everybody knows who Rosa Parks is, right? It was the only one that mattered. Okay? So that's the way that game is played. So the state, and when I refer to the state, I'm talking about either the federal state or the Idaho state government. The state presumes that you are a 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, or a territorial or a statutory U.S. citizen, a citizen of the federal government? Question mark? Unless you expressly state otherwise. Why? Because guess what? On your U.S. passport, you presumed you were a U.S. citizen. On your voter registration here in Idaho, it doesn't ask you if you're an Idaho citizen, it asks you if you are a U.S. citizen. See, the state is almost culpable. I'd go beyond almost. The state is culpable in this kind of brainwashing that has moved us away from our state rights protected under the Idaho Constitution to all of us thinking that the only place we can raise our rights is under the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. It isn't the truth. It isn't the case. I just showed you that Green versus Alechua case, right? What did he win on? State rights, didn't he? Under the state constitution. Now, during the same time, there were cases that I studied a couple of them out of Louisiana that were filed where a guy went into a business, it was a restaurant, and they refused him service because he wouldn't wear a mask. He sued him. But his claim was under Title 42 of the U.S. Code, which is the Civil Rights Act and discrimination. It was federal law. And everything, at least during that period that I could find, that was being filed under Title 42 discrimination, every single one lost. And here's the reason why. Title 42 discrimination is for race, religion, sex, age, and what else? I don't know. Disability. Federal discrimination law only operates upon those explicitly stated classes of people that are protected against discrimination. The Bill of Rights and the Idaho Declaration of Rights doesn't qualify it. Now, in the code it does, but not in the Constitution. In the Constitution, it's very broad and very open-ended, which means any cause, I could come in there, I believe that I can come in and I can say, this is a class of discrimination. I'm wearing a mask, and I'm not wearing a mask, they're wearing a mask, and there are other people out here not wearing a mask. I belong to a class of people that refuse to comply with this mask mandate. That is a class, in my opinion. And I believe it's discrimination on the part of the state of Idaho and of the federal government to say that they can discriminate against me because I don't wear a mask. Okay? That's what I believe. That's what I think. Your driver's license says U.S. citizen on it. Your social security number says U.S. citizen on it. Now, you've seen this monkey before, many of you. This monkey is the monkey that got his hand caught in the cookie jar. Okay? This is how they catch monkeys in some countries. They cut a hole in it just big enough for them to get their hand in, and they put a nut in there, and the monkey gets a hold of the nut. And it won't let go of the privilege so that it can be free. So when we take federal and state privileges, franchises, grants, and we're unwilling to let them go, we have to abide by the rules and regulations that attach to those benefits, okay? So, the plaintiff, this is a California case, just shortly, this was 1872, this was 4 or 5 years after the passage of the 14th Amendment. The plaintiff claims she is a citizen of the United States, and 1 of the United States and 2 of the state. Undoubtedly she is. Ms. Van Valkenburg was claiming that she had the right to vote in California. Now this is before suffrage took place. I don't remember what amendment that is in the U.S. Constitution, but this is prior to that. It is argued that she became such, meaning a citizen, by force of the first section of the 14th Amendment, which we just read, right? U.S. citizen. This is a mistake. It could be claimed that she became free by the effect of the 13th Amendment, by which slavery was abolished. But she was no less a citizen than she was free before the adoption of these amendments. Ms. Van Valkenburg didn't obtain citizenship through passage of the 14th Amendment. She is not a 14th Amendment citizen. That's what the court said here. Interesting, huh? She is not a 14th Amendment U.S. citizen.
So she wasn't a citizen at all?
She was a citizen.
He acknowledges that she's a citizen of the United States of America.
But not of
And of the
California.
state.
And she is of California. But she doesn't exercise the right to vote. Because that was, at that time, it was, can't think of the word. It was restricted just to men. When was the passage of suffrage? Yeah. Jeline?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's in 19, and I don't have the date.
That sounds about right. So it's about 1920 or something like that? About 1920, okay? But she, now, could California have given her the right to vote? I think so. I think California had the sovereign independence that they could have given women the right to vote without the federal government. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think they do. Because the states determined who their citizens were, and the states were who determined what their political rights were. And the right to vote is called a political right.
1920.
1920, okay. So, we've now talked about the United States and our relationship to the United States and to the state of Idaho. Now, interesting point, I was born in Utah. Do I have any rights in Utah? The answer is yes. I am a national of the state or nation of Utah. And if I were kicked out of the state of Idaho, I have a right to return to the state of Utah. That's called a national, okay? And that's international law. And guess what? Not only does Congress have exclusive jurisdiction over interstate and international commerce, international law also applies between the several states. So a national has the right to return to his nation, his nation of birth. And that's international law. So I could claim rights under international law as well. So, evolution of the Federal Bill of Rights and the Idaho Declaration of Rights. How are we doing, guys? Do we need to take a quick break? We all good? All right. So let me try to keep this understandable. The 13 original constitutions that were written by the 13 original states were the source material for the federal constitution. The federal constitution wasn't adopted until there at the middle of the page, 1787, right? That was when it was ratified. The Declaration was up towards the top, drafted in 1776. And the Declaration of Independence was the model for the state's Bill of Rights. Right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that we have unalienable rights, correct? Well, in 1780, Massachusetts passed their Constitution. That was 4 years after the Declaration and 11 years before the Bill of Rights was adopted. So we think of the Bill of Rights as being inspired. I believe it was. But it wasn't a new product. In fact, if you go back, well, it wasn't a new product. And you can see at the bottom there, in 1890, Idaho adopted a Declaration of Rights, the Idaho Constitution. So we'll kind of skip over some of that. The Declaration of Rights were provided for not the citizens, it was provided for the inhabitants of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1780. I'm just going to read this. All men are born free and equal. This is from Article 1. This is the first paragraph in the Massachusetts Constitution, 1780. All men are born free and equal and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties, that of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, in fine, that of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness. What does that sound like? It's louder. Article 1 of the Idaho Constitution.
Dennis, can I read you Virginia's in 1776?
Yeah.
Section 1, not that all men are by nature equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, of which when they enter into a state of society they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. That was the Virginia Bill of Rights, or Declaration of Rights in 1776.
76, same year of the Declaration. So there it was in the Declaration. Virginia, Thomas Jefferson penned it into the Declaration of Independence. So this concept wasn't foreign to the Americans in 1776. And it's in each of, I believe it's in all that I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of them, but those that I've seen, it's in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights of each of the states. This common thread that we have certain unalienable or inalienable rights. So, Massachusetts, in this one, there were 30 articles. And I'm just going to hit a few highlights. Okay, the bold underlined ones indicate a contribution to the Federal Bill of Rights. So, freedom of worship, sovereign independent states. Let's see, here we go. Sovereign independent states in the Federal Bill of Rights is found in Amendments 9 and 10, which it says all rights not exclusively given to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people. It talks about no property to be taken for public use, eminent domain, justice for all, no double jeopardy, no self-incrimination, due process, privacy, search and seizure, warrants are required upon oath. Okay, and then civil property has a right to trial by jury as well, and then we've got freedom of the press. Okay, the right to keep and bear arms. Now, Massachusetts is a little unique. The Massachusetts on the right to keep and bear arms says that it's only for common defense. Now, I would rather take the Federal Bill of Rights than this one. So I would apply to the Federal Bill of Rights. Is there any impairment of your right to carry arms in the Federal Bill of Rights? Absolutely none. It is unqualified. It is unqualified. So, right of assembly. Oh, the legislature alone possesses power to suspend laws. Governors can't do that. Now, there are powers allowed to the governor under certain emergencies, but they're qualified. They're limited. Okay. Then reasonable bail, no cruel or unusual punishment, no soldiers to be quartered without consent, and separation of powers guaranteed. And those are the amendments that correspond to that. So, yes?
Have you challenged the state by requiring a permit to buy a firearm under the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, like you do that you don't have to have a driver's license or license plates?
So he's asking the question, have I challenged the firearms requirements in the same way that I've challenged the right to travel? No, but I haven't got any reason to. I guess I don't follow that, because I can put a concealed weapon on my hip now without a permit. I don't have to have a thumbprint or anything to do that.
You have to fill out a background check in order to buy it.
Oh, you mean when you buy one?
Yeah.
You know, I think that would be a fun activity. Do you want to join me on that? You bring that back to me. I'm serious. I think that's a legitimate challenge. And I have read posts where people have claimed that they have challenged that and were able to buy the guns. So I don't know the answer. I don't, because I haven't done it personally. Yes.
So I work at Al's at Gun County. I'm going to give you a 4473 to fill out. If you do not fill that out and answer every question on that form, we will not sell you a gun, because the ATF will physically come and arrest us as an agent by doing that. And so, I mean, there's no argument. It happens all the time. We have people that come in there, and one of the questions on it is, now, they redid the form, 18A says Hispanic, non-Hispanic. 18B has got all these others, white, Pacific Islander, blah, blah, blah. We have this one guy who comes in, he wants every time to put his own little block on there and check it, others. Well, the minute he does that, take the form up, thank you very much, leave the store, we're not selling you the gun.
Okay, so it's a good point. It's well taken, okay? But the fact of the matter is a police officer that doesn't understand what I'm doing when I'm traveling, he may arrest me. And I have to be prepared for that. And I do so by having my phone recording the exchange, okay? And I provide him with the law at the time I do that. Now, I haven't done this and I haven't challenged it, but I'd like to. And I think it's a legitimate challenge. And I think it's the right thing to do. If they don't accept a modified form, then you can mail the form either to the government agency that regulates it, or you can send it to the management of the firm where you're going to make the challenge. So there's more than one way to do this. And I'll show it to you a little bit later. Yes, somebody had a comment.
Doesn't there exist, though, a distinction when we're talking about not the rights, but the privileges that that business or entity utilizes for being that vessel to sell the firearm? For instance, me and you can sell guns back and forth to each other all day long, and you're not governed by any of it.
That's correct.
None of this applies.
That's correct.
Only 5 a year legally can you do that by federal law.
The answer to that is an absolute yes. And the reason you can do that is because unless you're going across... Now, there may be questions that arise when you cross state lines, because that may be considered interstate commerce. I'm not sure it is. But what the government doesn't know, they can't prosecute. That's just a practical strategy.
Right.
But you've got a good point. So I recognize if I'm in my car and I'm traveling, not driving. Driving is regulated. So if I say that I'm driving a car, guess what? I have acquiesced to their jurisdiction. I have stepped into their jurisdiction when I use their copyrighted words. It matters the words that you use. When I travel, I travel. I do not operate a motorized vehicle. My car is not registered, and I cover up the VIN number.
But once everyone else has gotten their license, haven't they already signed a contract, so it doesn't matter?
They did what?
They signed a contract.
They did what? They signed a contract. Your license is evidence of you entering into a contract with the state. If they've got your signature, it means that you entered into a contract. And I propose that when you do that, you are surrendering a right in exchange for a privilege. And under federal law, is protected under the Supreme Court cases. The state cannot require you to surrender a right in exchange for a privilege so that they can regulate it and tax it. It's illegal, or it isn't a right. Or it isn't a right. Okay? It's a contract. You surrender your rights in exchange for a privilege. And what the privilege is they give you a card with your picture on it, and when you get stopped, they don't take you to jail. It's a get out of jail free card, is what it is. Somebody had a comment.
I'm a little bit curious with those contracts, that oftentimes the contract contains fraud in the inducement, from the idea that you cannot have this without signing, and there's no explanation of what you are signing away.
That's right.
And they are intimidating you into the belief that you can only have this by signing, when in fact it's not truly required.
That's called brainwashing. You've been taught since you were an infant that when you turned 14 you could drive, which is true if you got a license. You had to have a license to drive, but you didn't have to have a license to travel. Okay, so they're different animals. Yes.
Yeah. So there was a time that I talked about the Second Amendment. I think it's one of the most interesting rights because the basic idea behind it is that we have this provision within our rights so that we can defend ourselves against the tyrannical government. Like it's explicitly stated. I think it's the founders talk about in depth. Like the reason for the Second Amendment is not right. Isn't hunting. It's this idea that like we have the right to stand up for our rights against a negative government if we're off the rails. So I remember I was in a conservative setting and I actually expressed that idea in defense of the Second Amendment, and the response to it was, "You sound really extreme. You sound like a radical."
Do I sound extreme? Welcome to my world.
Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. I remember like the argument that I had with two people who claim to be
Good point.
looking me in the face and trying to convince me
Yeah.
that me making the argument that George Washington had made, that Alexander Hamilton had made,
Yeah.
in asserting my right for the Second Amendment was something that was going to land me in trouble.
Yeah.
And there's been more than one occasion that I've been talking about those things. People have thought that it was appropriate for them to try and like catch me, to get me to say something like, so if I believe that we can take apart against the tyrannical government, are you going to go to the Capitol? Are you going to go, like, you think that we should fight against the governor? And I'm like, why are you trying to put words in my mouth? Here's the idea that's existed. It's like stapled into our Constitution that exists there, is that when we reach a point where the government is excessively tyrannical in oppressing the people, which is part of human nature, that we have the right to rise up according to the Second Amendment and assert our own rights. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I'm going to go to the Capitol. What are you talking about? And I think that there is like an atmosphere of fear, even in asserting these basic rights, where it's like you begin to assert them, and you find yourself in the middle of wolves. But you're right, like you're correct in doing those things, and yet, like, it kind of works that.
The problem we've got is we've gotten so content. Everything is so convenient. We go to the grocery store and we buy TV dinners. I use that. There aren't too many TV dinners here, but you know what I'm saying. Pre-packaged, pre-cooked, microwave meals that are so fast and so easy. We rely upon our convenience so that we can go play. And I like to play, I got to admit. We are unwilling. Those who refuse, those who would give up, who would surrender their liberties for security, deserve neither. And we are in a state as a nation. Now, again, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, and I know I'm a little radical up here from some of the things I've told you today. Some of you have heard this kind of stuff before. Some of you, this is an entirely new concept. I don't remember. Oh, I know where I was going with that thought. Thank you for sharing that. You know, the Bill of Rights wasn't new to the Americas. England had a Bill of Rights in 1689, and one of the tenets of that Bill of Rights was the right to bear arms, and it was specific to self-defense. It wasn't just about militia. So when we adopted this Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment right to bear arms, now was it right to bear firearms? No. No. So when I talk about the meaning of words, you have to look at the words. Firearms and arms are not the same word. And what was the meaning of arms in 1776 or in 1791 when it was adopted? It's different than what it is today. And if you go to Title 26 of the U.S. Code, which is the ATF and it's the IRS, IRS regulates alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And they're all found under Title 26 of the U.S. Code. Okay? And it talks about the definition of firearms. And it isn't the same thing as you'd find in arms in 1776 under Webster's 1828 edition or Bouvier's 1918 edition. The terms are not the same. Do not presume when you read a statute or you read the Constitution that the word that's the common usage. Now, it's supposed to be common usage, but it's not. If you go to the Idaho statutes, you'll see in almost every section of the code, there will be a section that defines what the words are and how they're to be used in that statute. Now, is that bizarre? But it's a fact. I tell you, it's a fact. Go check it out. It's the truth. So, Idaho was the 43rd state accepted into the Union in 1890. Magna Carta, 1215, British Bill of Rights, 1689, Massachusetts Declaration, Virginia, 1776, Massachusetts, 1780. The Bill of Rights finally comes along. It's kind of a slow-moving one to catch up. 1791, and the Idaho Declaration of Rights in 1890. Okay, the Idaho Constitution has all of these different articles. Declaration of Rights is first, and we talked about that. Inspired by the Declaration of Independence. We've already read it, so we're just going to skip it, right? We good with that? Now, the concept that Thomas Jefferson wrote, and he heard somewhere, is the antithesis of global power that we've been watching develop and solidify over the last 2 years. Now, I'm telling you, if you think that this is new in America, you're wrong. You are naive if you think that what's happened over the last 2 years is something new. This has been going on for at least 120 years, and there were challenges before then to it. There have always been. It is a universal fact that there are tyrants and there are psychopaths and sociopaths, and they like power. It's a known fact that in the police industry that bullies migrate into state authority because they get to wield authority. And most people don't challenge it. That's a sad reality. So, okay, this is the Idaho Declaration of Rights. We've already kind of been through this. There's a lot of restatement of other things that we've talked about. Okay. So, Idaho citizenship, why does it matter? Is because congressional authority does not reach inside the borders of Idaho unless Idaho's government or you individually give it access. And the access is, what did you say you do when you get a license?
Contracts.
You contract.
You know, the question I've been hanging on to since then, so since most of us have entered that particular contract, if we ever wanted to start playing your game, what would we have to do? Let our license expire, or have we permanently screwed ourselves?
No. First thing you want to do is make sure that you don't have any tickets outstanding. You can't use this as a defense against an existing conflict. Okay? It's just thrown out. It's considered a frivolous defense. Okay? What you do, in my case, I sent my. It requires about 7 or 8 documents. One of them is I actually surrender the card and I send them a cover letter that tells them everything that's in the package. And one of the things is I challenge that the Title 49, which is what the Idaho Traffic Department of Transportation, where it's regulated, Title 49, is I go to the code and I say something like, I find nothing in this code that applies to private travel. It applies to commercial travel, which commercial travel is transporting for hire, getting paid to move something, either a person like in a taxi cab or on a bus, or moving products commercially, and that's called commercial transportation. I don't ever do that. How many of you accept, now some of you maybe you're an Uber driver or something like that, okay, so that's different. But when you're not traveling with or moving somebody else, then you're traveling. But when you're moving somebody for hire, that's called driving or operating a motorized vehicle. Now, I cannot drive a registered car because the car attaches to the state, and the state has what is called an equitable interest in it and a claim on that property. When you give it a title, in fact, car agencies give up what's called the certificate of origin. The certificate of origin is the first and best evidence of ownership. And when the dealership gives that to the state secures their interest, and what they do, you're exchanging a right for a privilege, and they send you a certificate of title. It's not a title, it's a certificate of title. It's not the same thing, okay? So anyway, you supply certain documents to them challenging the law, you send back it, and you don't say, what you're saying is I'm surrendering this back to you and I'm terminating the agreement. It's called a rescission of contract. And it's based on the principle that I entered into the contract under mistake of law and mistake of fact. The mistake of fact is that I believed that I was required to have it, and the mistake of law is essentially the same thing. I had been told and taught that I had to have a license in order for me to travel on the highway. That's mistake of law, mistake of fact. And the state accepted that and may have been misrepresenting the facts to me. And I say that. I believe that there is constructive fraud here. This is misrepresentation and constructive fraud. So that's just a brief explanation of it. But that's basically how you do it. And I sent a copy to the DMV and I sent a copy to the Secretary of State. Never heard anything from him. Yeah.
Do you have insurance on your vehicle?
I'm not going to answer that question directly. The answer to that is a person may choose to do that, but one of the problems with insurance is insurance operates under what is called admiralty law. Insurance was first developed on the high seas with the British Far East India Company and the King of England, or Queen, I believe it was, Elizabeth, that extended limited liability, the same as a corporation, extended limited liability to the ship on their operation on the high seas. And that was a form of insurance, and insurance is an admiralty or maritime contract, and it can bring a different jurisdiction into your activity. So you want to be a little careful with that, and if in private, I would be happy to share ideas on that. So when I voted last time, I had a driver's license at one time, and because of my name being on the driver's license database with the state, that makes my name subject to jury duty. And they called me in for jury duty. And at the time, I was just reading a lot of stuff on this stuff, and I just run across some of these ideas. And so I went in and I filled out the jury duty summons, gave them the questionnaire, and left it with them. Well, after I got home, I was reading this stuff and I ran across some more material on rights. And it occurred to me that I had compromised my state citizenship because the voter registration questionnaire asked, are you a U.S. citizen? So I sent him in a letter and I said, whoa, 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 whoa. I just answered your questionnaire, and I think I maybe answered some of those questions wrong. So you can do something wrong and then you can correct it. So I sent him a letter and I said, you know, I'm right in the middle of studying up on my rights and the legal issues around voter registration, and I believe that I filled out this questionnaire wrong. So I am reserving my right. And I said just exactly that. I said, I am reserving my right to amend the questionnaire that I provided to you earlier. And I did my studying. I spent a lot of hours researching that. And I went back and I got another questionnaire. And this time I came back and I answered all the questions differently. And I also added an affidavit to it. And the affidavit said, if you presume that I am a U.S. citizen, this document clarifies for my purposes that I am only a citizen under the constitutional United States of America, that I am not a statutory nor a territorial U.S. citizen, and I do not fall under the exclusive jurisdiction of Congress. That's what I said to him. And I went on and explained it, and then I refilled out the questionnaire, and I resubmitted it to him, and I said, if you can accept me as a jury member under these terms, then I agree to do so. I am anxious to fulfill my patriotic duty to serve on a jury if you can accept the terms that I have qualified here. And they sent me back a letter and said, we accept your terms. I did the same, that was on jury duty. I did the same thing with voter registration. Now, I told you that all these forms that they set up for us are for convenience. It is not for your convenience, it's for their convenience, okay? When I did voter registration, it took me 90 days to accomplish voter registration. It took me sending 3 letters to the Secretary of State to qualify my state citizenship and claiming the right to vote in an Idaho or a national election. It took 90 days, I got 3 letters back from them, and the final one, guess what they said? We accept your terms. They said, we accept you as a voter in an Idaho election as an Idaho citizen. They accepted the terms that I offered. It took 90 days. It was not convenient. And I probably spent on that, it probably took me 8 or 9 hours by the time I drafted my documents. Now, I didn't have anybody else's documents to use. I was making my own documents, okay? There were some documents I was able to find that were helpful in it. But I did produce my own documents. So pick the correct law to defend your rights. You can't fit a square peg in a round hole. If you're arguing for your rights and you're using federal law to protect your Bill of Rights, I'm telling you, you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. So, the protection of a person's right to privacy is like the protection of his property and his life, left largely to the law of the individual states. That's a U.S. Supreme Court case, Katz, 1967. Now, this is me growing up in Idaho. And I'm not sure if that's a pile of manure or a pile of dirt, because I've worked with both. But I have a job to do. Maybe I'm going to dig a hole, or maybe I just need to clean out a horse stall. Done plenty of that. So, I have to pick a tool. I'm not going to use, I could use a hand trowel and dig a post hole, couldn't I? It would take me a long time. I could use a snow shovel. I don't think so. A hammer wouldn't work very well, and a square nose shovel wouldn't work very well. What I really need is a irrigation shovel or a spade shovel, right? So when we're looking at the law, what tools are we going to use? Now, there are times, if you raise a constitutional question in a state court and you lose, can you appeal that to a federal court? And the answer to that is yes, you can. Can I go to a federal court and raise a state issue in a federal court? And the answer is no. The common law, there is no federal common law, is what they say. Okay, that's the way they term it. What you do is you challenge it in a state court. You take the common law with you out of the state court and move it into federal jurisdiction, and that's where you get federal authority to rule on a case. So, if you're looking for the Bill of Rights, you're doing it under state law, state constitution, and Idaho code. And I try to avoid the Idaho code as much as possible. And the reason is because the Idaho code is statutory and it is an interpretation of what is found in the Constitution. Whenever I can, I want to use the Constitution itself because it's the original text. It is it's called substantive law. It's the original text. Statutes and rules always challenge rules and regulations. That's another story. Okay. The privileges and immunities of the 14th Amendment protect very few rights because it does not incorporate any of the Bill of Rights or protections of rights of individual citizens. Instead, this provision protects only those rights which are peculiar to citizens of the federal government. I just brought that back again. So, do it yourself. Be your own expert. Now, we've just been through 2 years of mandate hell. I can hire attorneys, which cost lots of money, and you see that hand coming up for the haystack? He's holding a needle. Finding an attorney to defend on these kinds of rights is like finding a needle in a haystack. If you look at the directory for lawyers for the state of Idaho, I think in the whole state of Idaho there's maybe 5 that are considered constitutional attorneys. Civil rights kind of attorneys, okay? So, how's that working for you? On the other side, we have elected officials. Now, we have some great elected officials working for us here in eastern Idaho. But how successful have they been with the legislation over the last year? They've been stonewalled, hard as they've tried. So I'm not criticizing the politicians, but the question here is how's it working for you? Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. I have been involved in politics since I was 14 or 15. I read None Dare Call It Conspiracy when I was a sophomore in high school. I think I read it another time or two while I was in high school. Great books. I read other ones. I can't remember all the books I've read, okay? Lots of books. All of those were dealing with politics. How do we get the politicians to do their job? I'm telling you, the way to get the politician to do his job is you know what his job should be. And the way you know that is by knowing your Constitution, knowing what your rights are, and when they abuse your rights, getting out of your comfort zone and refusing to comply. So how are we doing now? This is what we've been doing. We were taught this in civics class in high school, that you need to get involved in politics, but it is more to it than politics. Yes?
We're not doing very well. When the legislative body met together a few weeks ago, they censured one of the best legislators, Priscilla Giddings, and they didn't stop the vaccination mandates from INL, which they probably could have done.
Yeah.
Which is what they said we were going back to do.
Well, we're not doing very well.
I agree. We're not doing very well.
No.
So, I have to admit, one of the problems is when you hook your wagon to government or to government money, you're setting yourself up for some risks. There are some inherent risks involved in dealing directly with government or with contractors, and I don't have a good answer to that other than it's not a good relationship, I guess. Yeah, somebody had a comment? Yes.
I just wanted to make a slight correction to what you said. You were taught that in civics.
Right.
We weren't taught that in social studies. We deviated from that.
What did they teach?
Nothing.
Oh, nothing. Oh, and they're teaching nothing more now. It's worse now. Critical race theory and this nonsense, and they're attacking the Constitution now.
Well, it's worse for our kids. They're not even taught social studies. They're taught social justice.
Yes. And they talk about equity instead of equality. And it's because they've heard this equality thing and thought, well, that's a virtue, it's a good thing, but they're not teaching equality anymore. Now they're teaching equity. In other words, you have something and I have an equity interest in it. I want part of what you've got. That's what this equity nonsense is. Say what?
That's socialism.
It's socialism. It is socialism. It is, yeah. Okay, so do it yourself. That's just a thought on that. Our time is gone. And you all have been really good to listen. I don't know, do we want to go on for a few minutes?
Yes.
For those of you that would like to. Those of you that feel like you need to leave, feel free to leave. If you don't have a constitution, Idaho Constitution already, they're up here. What's that?
I haven't signed it.
Yes, and so I'll put it over here. And if you sign, and just let us know that you were here, it would be appreciated.
And before people go out afterwards at 1, we're having basically a meeting for a kickoff meeting for Election Integrity Idaho, for Southeast Idaho. So Tim O'Donnell's come down from Boise for that, and I'll be helping to chair that. So that's at 1. So if that's of interest to you, then
Is that here?
That's
Right
here
here.
in this room.
Right
In
here.
this room, very
Today
good.
at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
1 o'clock right here.
Can you step aside, Vince, and, I mean, thanks.
Thanks, Cliff. He helped pay for those constitutions, guys. Thanks, Cliff. This is just a quick introduction to a guy named Carl Miller. He does the kind of stuff I do, okay? Really radical stuff. You know, being free is radical.
It is anymore.
Think about that. Okay, yeah.
Is there sound?
Oh, you know,
We don't have sound.
You know, some of you have seen this. I would suggest making a note on this. It's called Know Your Constitution by Carl Miller. I think he's dead now. But this guy was a Vietnam vet. I'll just tell you briefly about him. He was in Special Forces in Vietnam. Those of you that are familiar with Bogue Wrights, James Bogue Wrights, who ran for president years ago on the independent ticket, he was affiliated with this kind of group, but it was a group of officers in that were trying to restore constitutional law in our country. And they were teaching the officers the Constitution in Vietnam and probably elsewhere. And anyway, he took it upon himself. This was kind of a mission of his, and he was teaching the Constitution around the country and teaching people how to do the kind of things I'm doing. Now, I really respect Carl Miller. He's a wonderful introduction. I have studied with many other people that I've learned an awful lot from. So anyway, but this is one that is a great, it's a 3-part series. Each of the 3 parts is 2 hours long. It's long. I've watched it. I've watched the first part and the second part probably 6, 7, 8 times. Every time I listen to it, I learn something new. I went back and I made my own notes, summarized what he had to say, and then I went online and I found a PDF of his lecture. So you can find a PDF of his lecture online. It's just superb. Love the guy. So I just let him...
Good evening, folks. I want to thank you for inviting me into your home tonight to talk to you about an extremely important issue to you. I basically am here to talk about the United States Constitution and our government and some of the principles that you need to understand most thoroughly so that you can have an effective opportunity to exercise your constitutional rights. The whole purpose of this is that you understand that these rights come from God, okay, that they are God-inspired. God is the one who endowed us with these rights, and that this Constitution merely offers a legitimate program to protect that all of us can have the rights equally, and as long as we respect our neighbor and allow them also to have the rights equally, the protections are going to last forever. And the reality is that we are going to get thoroughly into your Constitution. We want you to find a Constitution wherever you can, and we are going to basically take you step by step through some of the most important parts of this Constitution so that you can better exercise your rights in a timely fashion. Now, the facts are simple. If you don't know your rights, you don't have any rights, and that's just the way it is. And if you certainly couldn't exercise those rights timely if you don't know what they are. So what's going to happen is they're going to tell you what your rights are, and do you think they're going to tell you in your favor? Certainly not. Now, we've come a long way to put this program on to help you. By the way, my name is Carl Miller. I want to thank you again for inviting me into your home. We're going to proceed with vigor. I should tell you a few things about me, that I'm a prior service soldier. I served 3 combat tours, Republic of Vietnam. I should tell you that I was a participant in the top secret project called Blue Book, where the officers in the jungle smelled a rat in a woodpile, and they decided to pull their top soldiers aside, and they come on over here. Come on over here. We want to talk to you. And they took their top soldiers in the corner, and they started teaching them things like duty, honor, country, pride in the Corps. They taught us history. They taught us all kind of programming as far as what's going on in our government. They taught us the Constitution. We had to be able to rattle the Constitution off just like we would any manual of arms. And this all took place totally top secret, so that we wouldn't offend any chains of command or any presidential problems similar to what happened between General MacArthur. And the bottom line is this was taken totally upon their own, shall we say, careers to pull this thing off. And this happened all throughout a lot of the military services in Vietnam. Marine Corps, Air Force, Army, they all pulled aside their best people, and they started putting everything on and teaching us our Constitution. So I'm going to try and instill in you that flame that was instilled in me over 25 years ago, in which I have been transferring ever since. I have been fighting tooth and nail to defend the Constitution. I have helped thousands and thousands and thousands of other people do the same. I teach people how to be their own counsel, to stand up in courts of law, and be able to exercise their constitutional rights in a timely and effective manner. And the good Lord willing, I'll be able to keep doing that. So why don't we right now try and get into some parts of the Constitution. The most important thing that I can teach you about this Constitution is the importance of reading it. You must read the Constitution and understand what physically is involved. You must know your rights and timely assert them. That is your burden. If you do not, then a legal term called laches incurs is in full force. Laches is a legal term which is defined as a laches is a species of action wherein a party of reasonable intelligence and integrity, having a right to take an action as is prescribed by law, and having failed to timely do so, loses all right to proceed. So what is actually happening out there, folks, is that laches is incurring because most people don't read their Constitution and know what's involved. So then you are left to being told, well, that's what it means. Okay, so you just got to do what you got to do, and you're told, and they're going to tell you in favor of them. They're not going to tell you in favor of you. So it's better for you to read the book and understand what's in it. It's not a very big book. I highly recommend the book. You can get several versions. A lot of times you contact your congressman. My congressman, Dominic Vincentini, state senator, supplied this one for me. John Kuhn, a libertarian candidate, has supplied several also. Some of these folks, just check with your local congressman or state rep. A lot of times they'll just give you one. If you cannot find one, go down to your United States government building here in the Detroit vicinity. It's called the McNamara Building on the first floor. And what we do then is we go into the government printing office, and usually they're about $1. But I highly recommend you go get one. I don't leave home without mine. I usually have 3 or 4 of them someplace. And I hand them out also myself. I give them out to whoever. I think one of the most kindest things I can do to a person is give them this book and show them how it works. This book is kind of like a genie in a bottle. If you know how to stroke this book, I'm telling you, the genie comes out. And it usually with a force that it will be clearly recognized in any court in the land. Now that doesn't mean it'll be easy. You might have to work a little bit. But basically there's an argument, and it comes like this. If I violate your rights, you may or may not know about it. If you know about it, you may or may not be able to do something about it. If you do have an ability to do something about it, you may or may not have the financial wherewithal to go to a finished program. If you do have the financial wherewithal, you may not have the intestinal fortitude to go to a finished program. So most of the time, your governments and your abusive personalities in government or your corporations pretty much have carte blanche to injure you. Because in 99.9% of the cases, most people will not proceed. But every now and then, you run into that one hard nut, and he doesn't quit or she doesn't quit till the cows come home, and what happens is that person will prevail. And those are the people that are actually generating better protections and better constitutional rights for you. Those are the ones that are going to the Supreme Courts and the Courts of Appeals and what have you, that are pushing, that are spending their life funds to allow you to have the benefit. But if you aren't there to catch the benefit, then the benefit is lost. So we're going to get right into the Constitution. We're going to teach you some things about it. Pay attention, because we're really doing this out of an act of love for you, and we're hoping to God you're going to pick up on it and pay attention. Okay? Now, I'm going to put one Constitution down here so the folks can see it. I will open this up from time to time to demonstrate things to you.
Okay, so trying to go through this quickly. He just talked about becoming educated, okay? Doing your own education. That is through reading. YouTube instructionals are available. And after you've done those, then what you've done is you've acquired the tools. That's how you acquire the tools, by your own study. And then, as he's described, and I use a policeman here. It doesn't need to be a policeman. It could be, like I say, the jury commissioner here sends me a subpoena. I have to fill out the questionnaire. And it was completely amicable. I mean, she was a doll. And I was nice to her and respectful. But I just said, I need to question these things. And it was just a friendly exchange of letters. And the same was true with the Secretary of State. I said, did I say voter registration or Judy? That was jury. And then when I did the voter registration, it just took some time. And everybody was courteous and kind throughout the exchange. So, but if it is in a confrontive situation, learn to zip your lip. That's called the right against self-incrimination. And then select the right law to use, okay? So, as the gentleman here earlier mentioned, that when you get the driver's license, you fill out a contract and you sign your name. Every time you sign your name, you're compromising some right that you have. If I enter into a contract, you and I, and you're going to sell me something, and we sign a contract, what I'm doing is I'm compromising my right to keep the money in my pocket, and you're compromising your right to hold title to the item that you're going to transfer to me. A signature or an assent to a transaction is always a compromise to some right that you have. It always is. Okay? The same is true when you're dealing with the state, most assuredly. So, those contracts that he mentioned are what are called adhesion contracts. And what an adhesion contract is a boilerplate. Have you ever heard the term boilerplate contract? It's just a rock solid form, and usually you presume that there is no opportunity to negotiate the terms of the agreement. When you fill out an application with the state, it's just a form. Does it say, would you like to make any changes to this form? No. Okay? But that's what's called an adhesion contract, or a one-way contract. One person's offering it who is in a superior position to you, either by money, or they're your employer, or they are the state of Idaho. Okay? So Facebook, when you got a Facebook account, I terminated my Facebook account here a few months ago because they changed their, actually it was early last year, I think in March or April, when they changed their terms of what do they call it? Anyway, their terms. Yeah, I terminated my account because I didn't like what was in the new agreement. Okay, Microsoft is doing the same thing. They keep trying to send me an update to Microsoft 11, and I don't want it. I don't want their new stuff because I know there's going to be some kind of invasion into privacy that comes along with it. I don't know what it is. Verizon, YouTube, you name it. So the federal government offers adhesion contracts to the state of Idaho in the form of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Agency. And then skipping on quickly here, at the bottom, that's the Idaho Health and Welfare. When you apply to Idaho for benefits, so we talked about benefits and immunities, they're going to have an adhesion contract that attaches to those benefits. So, this is what I was getting to. This is a check. Now, this is a composite check. Representative Bonneville County received over $13 million in ARPA funds. And I did a FOIA with Commissioner Christensen to get this. And they were very friendly and helpful. They gave me all the information I asked for. The state of, or Idaho Falls received over $2 million in ARPA funds. They got the check first, and the terms of the ARPA agreement came later. ARPA funds, payments reserved, terms came later. Okay, this is the terms of agreement. Now I've taken this out of the actual, it was a OMB form 1505-0271 recipient. So this was money, and you can see Roger Christensen's signature in the top right-hand corner. He's the chairman of the Idaho County Commissioners, or our Bonneville County Commissioners. But it states, number one, recipient also agrees to comply with all executive orders. This came from Steve Bradshaw. And those of you who were in that meeting, and I asked him, I said, can I get a copy of that? This is what I got a copy of. So, if we have municipal sovereignty of some sort in Idaho Falls, now Idaho Falls got the same thing. I've got the same form that came to the city of Idaho Falls. And I'm sure that the form I get back from the Idaho Supreme Court is going to have the same thing. The governor signed the same thing. What happened to separation of state and federal government? What happened to separation of powers? They have bypassed the separation of powers here. They have done it unconstitutionally, in my opinion. I think it's an illegal act. I think it is a what do they call it? Something of office, dereliction of duty, something like that. So they have bypassed the state Constitution's protections of our civil liberties. Our right under Article 1, Section 1 of the Idaho Constitution, my right to control my own life, liberty, and safety. Okay? So, the recipient agrees to abide by executive orders and shall provide for such compliance by other parties in any agreement it enters into with other parties. So, if the Department of Energy takes this money and they have a contractor, what are the name of the contractors? BEA, and these other contractors, they are required by the acceptance of ARPA money to extend the terms of this agreement that they will abide by all mandates, executive orders. There's our problem, guys. That's what's happened. We have violated the separation of powers. Not only have we done it between the state and the federal government, Biden has bypassed the legislature, Congress, in making these rules. He has also violated the separation of powers of the federal government. Done it with money. So, the requirement to include a term or condition in all lower tier covered transactions, that includes contracts and subcontracts. Treasury may impose additional conditions. It's an open-ended, it's a blank check, right? To violate our rights. It's a blank check. It's subject to repayment. Any debts determined to be owed by the federal government must be paid promptly. And then a disclaimer. Get this one. I talked to you about going into natural grocers, and I claimed that they were acting as an agent of the state, right? That's a big deal. If I can prove that there's an agent-principal relationship, that National Grocers is acting as an agent of the state, that makes the state liable for their actions, and they are violating a constitutional protection. They have a disclaimer. It says, the United States expressly disclaims any and all responsibility or liability to recipient or third persons for the actions of recipient or third persons resulting in death, bodily injury, property damages, or any other losses resulting in any way from the performance under this money, under these funds. And this extends to any contract or subcontract. And then the last one on this, acceptance of this award does not in any way establish an agency relationship. Now, just because they say that, does that mean that that's a fact?
No.
That's correct. Just because they claim it, this isn't the Constitution, this isn't even a statute, this is a contract under administrative law, under presidential order, okay? It's way down the line. And so just because they claim that that's the case doesn't mean it's the case. But that's what they're attempting to do, is to first of all discourage you from claiming there's an agency relationship, and second of all, trying to prosecute a claim under that agency relationship. So, okay, executive orders, contracts. All right. Social Security application, this is an SS5 form, you're a U.S. citizen. Where's the Idaho citizen? Okay, here's your homework. You ask the questions, what can you do personally? If you want to do something like this, this is the letter I sent to the Social Security Administration when I said to them, what is the law? Please cite for me the law that requires me, a natural person, to apply for, obtain, hold, or use a Social Security number. That's a FOIA request. And if you want to know how to do a FOIA request, just Google it. Federal FOIA form. Idaho FOIA form. It just comes right up. All you got to do is fill it in. It's pretty slick. I didn't get one. I had to search this one out, but it's very simple to find them today. Okay, so that was my question to them. You can send this kind of a letter to the District 7 Health Department. You can send it to the governor on his mandates. You can send it to Idaho Supreme Court. You can send it to the mayor, and I did. Okay? This is the letter I got back. So when you talk about activism and doing something that is proactive to try to change the laws, if our representatives and our leaders, I hesitate to use the word leaders, there are some, but yeah, you know. So anyways, I sent that FOIA request to the Social Security Administration. This is their response. It is a form letter, and it says people cannot voluntarily end their participation in the program. Can I rely on their statement? Can I believe that that's true? In the IRS code, there have been judicial decisions made when people went to the IRS in court, and they said, well, I relied on the IRS manual. And the court said expressly, you cannot rely upon agency regulations and manuals. It holds no legal water. It's just a fact. So they said everyone working in the United States is required to pay Social Security taxes. Do you see any statutes cited in their letter? There aren't any. The only statute cited is right here, and that refers to the agency's obligation to ask. The agency's obligation. If a police officer says, please give me an identification, and there's no probable cause, do I have a corresponding obligation to give him my ID? No. He stops me, there's no probable cause, I'm walking down the street, give me your ID. He may have a department policy that requires him to ask me the question. I'll grant him that. Do I have a corresponding duty to respond? The answer is no. So, I sent another letter. They didn't answer my question. I said, excuse me, but you didn't answer my question. You were vague and you were off point. Please give me the answer to my question. Cite for me the statute in federal law that makes me an Idaho citizen, not enfranchised with government privileges, to obtain, hold, and use a Social Security number. That's basically what I said here. Your question was ambiguous. If such an obligation exists, provide me with the law. Give me the law. Second response. Does that look familiar? It's the same letter they sent me the first time. They didn't answer my question. So, final response was what's called rescission of contract. And that goes to your question about how do you handle this kind of a situation. Then you file a rescission of contract based on the fact that I entered into the agreement under mistake of law and mistake of fact. There is no law. You have not provided me with the law. And I give you 10 days in which to respond. Or now, I would do the letter. This is a long time ago. This a long time ago. I would do the letter a little differently today. I would say you are allowed 30 days in which to respond or contest. That's the word. In which to contest my claim. If you do not respond within that time, you are forever stopped from contesting my claim. That's how you do it. Okay? And you learn that from, you see samples and you do your own thinking on it. That's how you do it. Okay? And I attached an affidavit, which was very specific to me, to this letter, stating the facts of when I entered into the Social Security agreement. So now we brought up Social Security here. Didn't bring that up earlier today. So, if you want to test this, you can test it. You're not violating any rights. You're not challenging them. You're just simply asking a question. It's a FOIA request. Send a FOIA request and see how they answer it. And by the way, I did a similar thing to this recently. The letter's a little bit different, but it's essentially the same. There is no citation of law anywhere. And it says there are Supreme Court cases that say you can't do this, but guess what? They didn't give me the name of the Supreme Court case, did they? They didn't. So, this is a FOIA request for me to get a copy of the original SS5 form, which is the application for Social Security number. This took me 6 months to get back from them, because I'm guessing they're getting a lot of requests for these. There may be a lot of requests, I don't know. But the FOIA isn't here. I have the FOIA, but I didn't attach it. What I did show you here was it cost me $61 to get a certified copy of the original SS5 form. And this has my signature, and it has an assigned Social Security number, and it has all that information from 50 years ago. 50 years ago. I was a minor, right? I was 15. How old were you when you got your Social Security number? Did you have legal capacity? No, you didn't have legal capacity. I was advised by those people that I relied on for legal advice at the time, my parents and my employer, on all those things. Anyways, that was done.
So do you travel? Do you leave the U.S.?
I have a passport.
Okay, and you have a, does that passport make you, is that a contractual?
It's a good question. You have to apply for the passport, so the answer is yes. Is there a signature? What do you state on it? What I did with my passport, now I did the passport before I understood some of these things. So what I did was I sent a document to the passport services and gave them notice of my change of status and advised them that I am in this case, I'm claiming, for these purposes of a passport, I'm claiming U.S. nationality. I'm an American national, or a national of the United States of America. Yeah, an Idaho citizen. Not a citizen of the state of Idaho. The state of Idaho is a proper title describing the government of Idaho. So, anyway, that's the end. We took a lot of time. Thanks for your patience. Yeah.
And they force you to use your phone to be able to pay. They don't take cash anymore.
Who?
Going to a ball game, watch a basketball game, the high schools. What can be done about that? Some do, some don't.
You go into...
You have to do online pay, go online, use your phone and go online.
I don't know the question. It's not convenient. I tried to sign up with Planet Fitness a few years ago. I was doing it as much to experiment on the deal. And they told me that I had to pay them with a revolving monthly payment using a credit card.
Right.
And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, then you can't be a member. And I thought to myself, now, I didn't go to the effort to do this. I just had other things I was dealing with, and it wasn't that big of a deal for me. I didn't join with them. But the question is, if the United States law makes currency the legal tender in the United States, can they refuse payment from me for legal tender? In other words, can I pay it in advance for a full year, or can I pay for it monthly or something? I suspect...
You're still doing it online. So you pay
That's right.
tax. They're saying no, and I asked them where it's coming, it's coming from the state.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you on that, because I've not encountered
No,
that
it's a thing
problem.
that deals with the banks, but yeah, just to get you in.
My guess is you might be able to send a check. I don't know that. I don't know if they allow that.
But they don't allow anything, so.
Yeah, I don't
I was
know.
talking about,
And they say-
last night we had basketball games at Hillcrest, right?
Yeah.
You walk up to the door at Hillcrest to get into the ball game.
Right.
And they're like, we're not gonna accept your cash. You have to get on your phone, you have to scan the QR, here's the QR code. You have to scan it, you have to go. Right, they're refusing the legal tender of the nation
Right.
to allow you into a public event that they've already made that offer to.
Thank you. I have a question before you leave. I've got a follow-up to this. Is contracts and your rights. Is there people here that would be interested in a lecture on contracts and your rights, and it deals specifically with adhesion contracts? If there are, I'll plan one out for probably 3 weeks from now, probably do it on a Saturday again, for those that are interested. So,
Again, before everybody leaves, let's give Dennis a big hand. I think he did a great job.
thanks for being here. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
And as Brian said, in about a half hour, we're going to have another gentleman here, Election Integrity, Idaho.
Tim O'Donnell, he just drove down from
okay.
Boise to host this, so if you guys have an interest in local state election integrity, please come back in a half hour.
Right, it's a big issue, obviously. We ought to all be concerned with that. Thank you.